Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Math Logic. So today we're gonna work on equations. The subject will be subject of the formula. So I'll be using my document camera to demonstrate some stuff to you. So for those of you all that have not done subject of the formula or have done, right, and had some issues, by the end of this presentation you all should be very familiar with how to work on any subject of the formula type question, right? So let's go straight to the demonstration. Okay, so in subject of the formula type questions, we more or less call this topic transposition. All right, and what happens is that the goal is normally to express a variable in terms of a number of other variables. All right, so there's always a left hand side and a right hand side. So say for instance, if A is the subject of the formula, then the expression for A in terms of the other variables would be what's on the right hand side. If B is the subject of the formula, then the goal is to actually make sure that B ends up on the left hand side, right? Left hand side of the equal, and everything else is on the right hand side. Similarly, if C is the subject of the formula, C should be the only variable on the left hand side. So the goal of this topic, transposition, is really to find an expression for any variable in terms of the other. The variable that we're going to be finding the expression of is normally called the subject of that formula. Right? So now that we got the introduction out of the way, let's try a couple of examples. Now, let's look at this example. K equals AB, where A is the subject of the formula. Now, to actually get the subject of the formula in terms of the other variables, what we have to do is to conduct a number of operations, which we will do on both sides of the equation until we actually get the subject of the formula by itself on the left hand side. So K equals AB. Make A the subject of the formula, so we're going to end up with A on the left hand side. So first thing we do, K equals AB, the left hand side is here, right hand side is here. So first thing we need to do is to switch sides, right? A is on the left hand side, on the right hand side, it should be on the left hand side. So therefore we switch things around. A, B equals K. Right? So that's the first thing we do, switch sides. So A is on its correct side, but it's not by itself. So the second thing we do, we realize if we were to end up with A alone on the left hand side, to actually have that happen, we needed to do something. And that something is to divide the left hand side by B. Whatever we do on the left hand side, we must also do on the right hand side. So therefore, we need to divide both sides by B. AB on B equals K on B. And when we do that, we realize that the B's on this side, the left hand side, will be cancelled out, and we end up with A equals K on B, and that is our answer. So A, being the subject of the formula, has been expressed by the equation, the expression K on B. See how easy that was. It wasn't complicated, right? So let's work on a more complicated question. So, more complicated question, m over n equals p on q. N is the subject of the formula, so we therefore want to get an equation, an expression for n in terms of the other variables. So first thing we do, we look at the equation and we realize that, okay, n is on its correct side. The only thing is that n is now on the denominator side. So, what's the first thing we do? We need n to be on top. So the first thing we do, we need to invert this side. Right? Let's first label left hand side, right hand side. So we need to invert the left hand side so that n is on top. But if anything we do to one side, we need to do to the other side. So we invert both sides. So we end up with n on m equals q on p. Alright, so that's the result of that first operation, inverting both sides. Now, we realize that we have, and let me write it a little bit better, n on m equals q on p. So we have this equation. We need n to be the only variable on the left hand side. So what operation we need to do to have that achieved? So therefore, what can we do to this left hand side so that the result on that side is only n? And the answer is, if we multiply the left hand side by m, we would end up with n alone on the left hand side. And whatever we do to the left hand side, we need to do to the right hand side also. So therefore, multiply both sides by m. N on m multiplied by m is equal to q on p multiplied by m. Therefore, the m's will cancel out and we will end up with n equal q p m, which is the same thing as, right? So sorry for that, I actually was out of focus. So what we did, we multiply both sides by m. N on m by m equals q on p by m. The m's cancel out and we end up with n on this side equals q over p by m, which is the same thing as qmp. And that's the answer. Any one of them will be accepted. So you saw how easy that was? Very easy. So let's work with a more complicated one. Right, so this one is 5x plus 9. 5x plus 9 equals y, of which x is the subject of the formula. So our goal is to actually get an expression for x in terms of all the other variables. Now, that means x is going to be the only variable on the left hand side. So let's label the sides again. Left hand side, right hand side. So, first thing we do, x is on the correct side. It has to be on the left hand side, so it's on the correct side. What's the next thing we need? First thing we need to do towards working on making sure that x remains on the only variable on the left hand side. Remember, whatever we do to one side, we have to do to both sides. So the first thing we do, we see 5x plus 9 equals y. So the first thing we need to get rid of is this 9 on the left hand side. How do we do that? We do that by actually subtracting. If the left hand side has 9 that we don't want, we have to subtract 9 to get rid of that 9. And therefore, we have to subtract 9 from the right-hand side also. So therefore, it's going to be 5x plus 9 minus 9 equals y minus 9. That's going to result in these 9's going to more or less, this is going to subtract 9 from the 9, so we're going to end up with 5x equals y minus 9. So that's the first step. We still have on the left hand side other things other than the x. We need to have x by itself on the left hand side. So we have more to do to end up with an equation for x in terms of all the other variables. So what do we need to do next? Next thing we need to do, we realize we have 5x on the left hand side. How can we remove that x, that 5? How can we remove that 5? The only way to remove that 5 is by dividing the left hand side by 5. And whatever we do to the left hand side, we have to do to the right hand side. So let's go ahead and divide both sides by 5. Divide both sides by 5. And therefore, the 5 is going to cancel out, and we will end up with x equal y minus 9 over 5. And that's the answer. X is equal to y minus 9 over 5. So far, right, we attempted a number of questions. And it's the same procedure. There's no one way to work out these questions. You really have to look at what's on the left hand side and determine what needs to happen next to further move towards the objective, which is to end up with the subject of the formula on the left hand side and everything else on the right hand side, right? So we want to actually work out a more complicated question. So if you're ready, let's go ahead. Okay, so this is a more complicated one. M equals 4bc square root all over a. And b is the subject of the formula. So which means b has to end up as the only variable on the left hand side. So first step, whenever we start with cases where the subject of the formula is on the right hand side, first thing we always have to do is to switch sides. So therefore, 4bc square over a equal to m. Right? First thing we do, switch the sides. Square root of 4bc over a equals to m. Right? Second thing now, we have b on the left hand side. What do we do next? Well, the first thing we could do now is to get rid of this a. The only way to get rid of this a is to multiply the left hand side by a. A is in the denominator of that left hand side, and if we place a on the numerator, then we could cancel them out. But remember, whatever we do on the left hand side, we have to do on the right hand side also. So 4bc square root over a multiply by a equals m by a. That allows us to cancel out the a's and we end up with square root 4bc equals ME. Now, after we get this now, what can we do next? Well, we realize on the left hand side we have 4bc squared, square root. Right? We need to get rid of that square root. So how we get rid of that square root is to square the left hand side. So if we square the left hand side, we're going to actually remove the square root, but we have to do the same thing on the right hand side. So therefore 4bc square root squared should be equal to MA squared. That will give us 4. Right, so this is out of focus a little bit. So 4bc square root squared will give us MA squared. We square both sides. And once you square both sides, we're going to end up with 4bc equals M squared A squared. So, looking at the left hand side, what can we do next? If we want to end up with B on the left hand side only, we have to divide the left hand side by 4c. And whatever we do on the left hand side, we have to do on the right hand side. So 4bc divided by 4c will give us M squared A squared over 4c. The c will cancel out, the 4 will cancel out, and we're going to end up with B equals M squared A squared over 4c. That's the answer. So, you saw how easy it was. So it's not very difficult. The more difficult the question is, the same approach just is going to require us to do a little more work. But the procedure is the same. We still have to look at the left hand side and see what needs to be done to better fit the equation to what it should be. Alright, and what it should be is the subject of the formula being on the left hand side only. Everything else on the right hand side. So it's very simple. Alright, if we do much more complicated questions, the procedure is going to stay the same. Alright, so we did some examples, we did some questions. I hope you all have a fair understanding of how to do questions requiring you to transpose, and I'll see you all in the next one.